October is such a unique month to visit Iceland. You get those beautiful autumn colors early in the month, first glimpses of winter. It is one of the best times to see the northern lights, and prices are lower than in summer. But it also has some downsides. October is one of the rainiest months of the year, and the weather can be very unpredictable. Some parts of Iceland start to close for the season, and there are certain things you need to be aware of before you hit the road. My name is Jan, I have lived in Iceland for over 10 years now, and in this video I'll share with you everything you need to know before visiting Iceland in October. From the weather and what to pack, to driving tips and the best things to do, so you can basically plan your trip the right way and avoid common mistakes. Let's start with the most important thing you need to consider, the thing that will probably have the biggest impact on your trip, the weather and daylight hours. At the start of October, it can feel almost like late September, with crisp autumn air and colorful landscapes. But by the end of the month, winter conditions really start to set in. The average temperature usually sits between 0 and 7 degrees Celsius. What really matters though is wind and rain, and there is a chance that you'll experience quite a lot of it. The wind is also which makes it feel like it's way colder than it actually is, and October also usually brings some of the first strong autumn storms, and they can completely change your plans. October is basically a month where flexibility really matters when it comes to road trips, but more on that later. Daylight is also something to keep in mind. At the beginning of October, you get around 11 hours of daylight, but by the end of the month, it drops to about 8 hours. There is still plenty of time for sightseeing, but you won't have the same flexibility as in September, for example, or during the summer when the sun doesn't set. And this means that you will simply have to keep an eye on the clock a little bit more, if you don't want to miss a location before it gets dark. But longer nights have one big advantage, a higher chance to see the northern lights. And October is actually one of the best months for it. And one thing that I get asked all the time on this topic, Jan, where is the best place to see the northern lights? And the truth is that there really isn't one specific spot to see them. Seeing the northern lights isn't about where you go, it is about having the right conditions. You basically need a combination of three things: clear skies, solar activity and a little bit of luck. The best place to see the aurora is simply anywhere that's dark and away from towns or other sources of light pollution. That could be a remote spot somewhere out in the nature or even a dark area somewhere behind Reykjavik. The easiest way to figure out if you have a chance of seeing them is to check out the website weather.is. They have a special aurora forecast map. On that map, the green areas show cloud cover and the white areas are clear skies. And on the right side you can see the number from 0 to 9. That shows the strength of the aurora. And the higher the number, the stronger the activity. And sure, there are more precise and more complicated apps, but in all those years of living here, I have never actually used them. I just believe in keeping it simple. And so far, that has worked out quite well. And now let's talk about the clothes and what to pack. Whether you'll be just sightseeing during the day or standing outside at night, waiting for the northern lights, you'll definitely need clothing that will keep you warm and dry. And I'll go outside in a bit and show you what I personally wear, but first here's one tip that I want to share. If you are traveling from part of the world that doesn't have cold winters and therefore you probably don't own any warm clothes, or you just don't want to buy an expensive gear just for a single trip. And the solution for that is that you can actually rent a proper clothing right here in Iceland, with companies like Iceland Cover, for example. And I actually have a 10% discount that you can use with them, and you'll find that discount in my free packing list that you'll find in the description below. Alright, so let's dig in. And before we do, actually, I want to say that it is 24th of September as I'm filming this video, and so you can see I'm standing in a shorts and t-shirt outside, and this is most likely not going to be the case when you are here in October. And so let's just get you prepared for the weather that you are most likely going to encounter, which is more colder and rainy weather. Alright, so let's just start with what I usually wear and what I always use as a base layer is something like a merino wool t-shirt. And the reason I choose that is that even if you get sweaty, you won't get cold, at least not as much as if you were wearing something like a cotton t-shirt. And the next reason is that you can wear this multiple days in a row and it still won't stink, and that's great if you're traveling for multiple days and you don't really want to bring too many clothes with you. On top of the t-shirt, what I usually wear is something like a light down jacket, and if you don't have something like this or you just don't like to wear this, you can also replace it with something like a warm fleece. Then if it's very windy or if it's cold, on top of that I wear something like this. This is like a waterproof, windproof shell. And if it's very cold, then I also like to wear something like this underneath the jacket, which is Icelandic woolen sweater. And again, you can replace it with a different layer. But this is something that you can actually buy in Iceland. It is not very cheap, but it is a great souvenir to bring back home with you. And so this is definitely something to consider. And if it's raining too much, what I usually do is I also bring like a proper rubber jacket, you know, a raincoat basically. This is always nice to have, especially when you combine heavy winds and a lot of rain. And sometimes not even a good Gore-Tex jacket is enough. So yeah, that's good to have. Then if you move to the legs, it's pretty much similar. You know, I usually wear merino wool long johns. On top of that, waterproof hiking pants. And if it's too cold, what I like to wear is something like this, insulated wool padded pants. And again, you can like combine it, you know, sort of depending on how cold it is or if it's raining or not. Or I would recommend you to also bring a proper rubber raincoat pants basically, you know. And it is not very good when you are hiking, for example, because you'll get sweaty real fast, but it's great for these situations when it's really like pouring rain with, you know, heavy winds and stuff. And some other things that we cannot forget is a buff to protect your neck, or bring something like a scarf, you know, then something like a warm woolen hat, then something like thin waterproof gloves. Of course, you can also bring something thicker, but I find this more practical because you are always taking things out of your pockets and stuff. And even though you might be warmer in something like, you know, waterproof, basically snow gloves, yeah, this is more practical in my opinion. Now let's move to the footwear, and here you'll definitely want to forget things like sneakers. Sure, you can bring that for, you know, driving and stuff, but that's the last thing that you want to have for, you know, when you are walking on the muddy trails or when there is a snow and stuff. And so what you'll definitely want to have is some sort of hiking shoes. You know, it can be something thinner like that, or basically a proper hiking boots. It's also important that it's above ankle, you know, and that's both for the situations when there is a, you know, deeper snow, or if there is a lot of rain and mud and stuff. So if you don't plan on doing too much hiking, what I like to wear a lot in weather like this is basically something like a gumboots, and that might come really handy too. So it's up to you, whichever you decide to bring. Just remember, you definitely want to have at least one pair of some sort of waterproof boots, and something that has a good grip too. Now, there are also some things that I don't have here and that don't fall into the clothing category, but you can still consider bringing. One of them is something like a simple crampons that you can just strap over your boot, and that will definitely be useful if it's already freezing and you are visiting waterfalls, because what happens is that a lot of the water spray that is around the waterfall just freezes over, and the trails that go around it become crazy slippery. And so just check the weather before you leave. If it looks like there's already a proper winter and freezing temperature, then you can definitely bring this with you. Also consider something like hiking poles. That also helps with balance on the frozen trails. And one more thing I wanted to mention, definitely bring something like a reusable water bottle. Iceland has some of the cleanest tap water in the world, and so the last thing you want to do is to buy a bottled water here in the store. Also, there is one thing that I just realized I should have mentioned. You know, you see how I have multiple layers? The reason for that is quite simple, you know. A, you never know what weather you will get. B, you are constantly moving in and out of the warm car, going to stores and stuff. And C, sometimes there might be a hike. And so what that means is that having multiple layers basically allows you to control your body temperature better. You know, basically rather than just bringing one heavy duty coat or a pair of fake insulated ski pants, you know, that will basically make you sweat like a pig after just a short walk up the hill. But now when you know what clothes to pack, you might also want to know what to expect on the roads, because driving conditions in October can change quite quickly. Early in the month, roads are usually still clear, you know, especially in the south, but by mid to late October, you can start seeing ice patches, snow, or even full-on winter conditions, especially in the north, west fjords, or even east fjords. Just keep in mind that when exactly the first snow comes, that's different every year. But generally, the end of the month already has a much higher chance of snow than in the beginning. And when it comes to which car to rent at this time of the year, I strongly recommend renting a 4x4 vehicle, you know, even if you are just sticking to the ring road. The mountain roads or off-roads are more or less all closed by now. so you don't need to rent a super serious off-road vehicle, but the 4x4 is definitely worth the investment. So all in all, if you are only visiting South Coast, then you can most likely get away with just renting a two-wheel drive car in October. But if you are driving around the entire ring road or visiting areas like North Iceland or Westfjords, there is a higher chance that you will see some snow on the road. But is it possible that you will spend all that money on 4x4 car and then not even encounter any icy conditions at all? And sure, it is absolutely a possibility, but in my opinion, the last thing that you want to risk is basically driving a two-wheel drive car here in a snowstorm without any previous experience driving in Iceland or in snowy conditions in general. And so just think about it. And if you want to save some money on rental car, in the description I'll also leave a discount code for my car, which is one of the trusted local companies I personally recommend. And as I mentioned, October is also when Iceland starts getting some of its first strong autumn storms. And even if they don't bring any snow, these storms can come with heavy wind and rain, and they can make driving pretty dangerous. And that's why the most important thing before you go anywhere is to always check the road conditions. There are basically two websites that you absolutely need. One is road.is, which shows you road conditions and closures. And then you have weather.is, which shows the weather forecast and wind speeds. And then there's also a safe travel app that sends you alerts and warnings straight to your phone. And one thing that I want to mention, even though that's hopefully not even going to happen when you are here, if let's say a first strong surprise snowstorm comes during your trip, and if the storm is strong enough, certain roads, especially those leading across the mountain passes, will close. And if that happens, just remember, never attempt to drive across. A, you would be risking your life, and B, it is illegal and you would be facing some hefty fines. Plus, if you get stuck and you would need to call for help, then to cover the cost of the rescue, that can be pretty expensive. And as I'm recording this video, I'm starting to realize how some of these things sound, and I just want you to know, I'm not trying to scare you with all these things. I'm just trying to basically get you ready for the worst case scenarios. And hopefully you'll have a beautiful weather throughout most of your trip. But if you don't, then you are at least prepared for whatever Iceland decides to throw at you. Now, for those of you planning to go camping, whether that's in camper van or a tent, there are a few things that you need to consider. First of all, many campsites in Iceland usually close by the end of September, which makes things a little bit more challenging. One thing you can do is check out the map of campsites on Happy Campers website. Here you can see which places are still open this time of year. And speaking of Happy Campers, my discount code currently gives you 25% off, and it actually stacks with their own discounts which they already have on their website. This means you can save up to 50% of the total cost, which is huge. I'll leave the discount link below this video, so make sure to check it out. But despite the colder weather, I think that traveling in camper van makes a lot of sense in October. And here is a good example, like right now at the end of September, the south of Iceland has been getting some relentless rain for the past 3 days. While up here in the north, it's windy, but completely dry. And if you have booked hotels, there is not much you can do, you are basically stuck. But if you have a camper van, you can simply pivot your plans and, simply drive to wherever the weather is better. And I think that this kind of flexibility can sometimes make a huge difference in your overall trip experience. One thing that I wouldn't really recommend though is camping in a tent in October. And I mean, sure, you can go for it and pray for a good weather, but just keep in mind that you are risking a scenario where you get like 30 meters per second winds and heavy rain, and you might end up having to book a hotel last minute, or sleep inside of the car just to make it through the night. Alright, but let's now actually touch on something more fun, the things that you can actually do in Iceland in October. One of the best things about visiting Iceland in October is that you still have access to most of the scenic sites and activities, but with far fewer crowds than in summer, which in my opinion is one of the biggest advantages of this month. Basically all the main sites along the ring road are still open, all the waterfalls, black sand beaches, hot springs and so on, and so you can absolutely still experience all Iceland's highlights. Hiking is still possible too, especially earlier in the month. Just expect it to be a little bit of a wet experience sometimes, and it's probably a good idea to stick to lower elevation since higher trails may already have some snow or ice. And if you'd like to book a guided tour to experience Iceland in a way you wouldn't be able to on your own, here's a list of all kinds of tours for inspiration. One thing people often ask me and they often want to experience here are puffins, but unfortunately puffins are usually gone like by end of August. However, with a bit of luck you might spot some other wildlife here, like reindeer, arctic foxes or whales. And speaking of things that aren't possible in October, as I mentioned earlier, the highlands are usually completely closed by now, and so no off-road adventures until next summer. Also, earlier in the video I mentioned that the bad weather might force you to completely adjust your plans. And so if the weather turns too bad to be outside, depending on where you are, you can still find plenty of fun things to do. From relaxing in hot springs and all kinds of pools to, checking out museums and exhibitions like lava show and much more. And then you have guided activities or tours where the weather doesn't really matter, like snorkeling, ice caves, rafting, lava tunnels, and so much more. Now, people always ask me about which places they should visit, and that is a very broad question. Why? Because there are hundreds of breathtaking locations all around Iceland, and honestly, everybody will be intrigued by something completely different. For example, I personally don't often visit those famous places like Gullfoss anymore, just because how crowded they are. While for someone visiting for the first time, they might find it completely breathtaking no matter how many people there is. Or I can recommend you to go and hike somewhere fun, like Múlagljúfur Canyon. But then some people will go like, it was nice, but not that impressive. Exploring Iceland is a lifelong project in my opinion. Not only because of how many stunning places there are here, but also because the same place can be both incredible and underwhelming depending on person, weather, time of the year and so on. And I hope that this makes sense. And so in my opinion, the best thing to do here is to simply do a deep dive on the map and basically list out the places that catch your eye. And you can use whatever tool you want, but if you want to save some time, you should probably check out my map first if you haven't gotten it already. It has all the activities and must-visit places in Iceland, from the most popular spots to my personal favorite hidden gems that 90% of tourists never see. And it's not just a map, it's a travel and navigation tool I personally use all the time when exploring Iceland. And as always, the link will be below this video, so I recommend you to check it out. Alright, before you go and start planning at all, let me just say that, in my opinion, October is an amazing month to visit Iceland. From the northern lights and bright orange autumn landscapes, to fewer crowds, lower prices, and even the chance of seeing snow completely transform the scenery. It's a real special time to experience the country. That said, October is also unpredictable, as I already mentioned a couple of times in this video. The weather can change dramatically and it is just impossible to say what kind of experience you will have. And this is something that you just cannot plan for in advance, but what you can do is to be ready. Bring the right clothes, have a few backup plans and be willing to roll with the punches. Trust me, it really helps to have a clear idea of what you will do, if your original plans fall through. And so with that said, I think that you should be pretty set for your trip. But honestly, there is just so much that you can learn about visiting Iceland and there is so much that just wouldn't fit into this video. And so if you enjoyed this one, then you will definitely want to check this video next and I'll see you there.